Welcome back to the show at 6:47 as we get you underway for the day. So we're talking about this idea of the rise of socialism, and we see a lot of this in polls. Gallup just recently had a poll out, and in the poll, only 36% of Americans are satisfied with the current state of the country. Only 36%. Of the 61% that are unsatisfied, many believe the social, economic, and cultural issues plaguing the country will lead ultimately to its downfall. Now, that's interesting because we were just talking about the Tytler cycle a second ago, right? And this is a cycle that appears in every empire throughout history, right? It's just a cycle that goes through the entire swath of history, and whether it was the Romans, the French, the English, you see the exact same cycle go through all of them. And and it's from that end of that cycle where people begin to rebel really against the current status quo, when the elite, when the wealthy have all the money and the power. Eventually the serfs rise up and revolt and kind of overthrow the king, so to speak. And this, by the way, that's why America is here, right? The king was oppressing the serfs of England, and they said enough, and they all got on a boat and came here. And we established America. And here we are, 200 and almost 50 years later, and we're talking about the same things, which is always fascinating to me. And this is why we should ensure that our children read history and understand history, because we're talking about doing the same things in our government, which were the very reasons why we left England to start with to come to the U.S. And yet somehow now it's completely acceptable. It's completely fine that we do these things, but these were the very things that we revolted and rebelled against in the first place. But it's okay now. And so as we talk about these cycles, and as we look at how Americans generally feel about things, it's important to understand where we came from and what these things ultimately lead to. And this is why it's interesting that all of a sudden, it seems like all of a sudden anyway, but this has actually been brewing for the last couple of decades. As the wealth gap has continued to get broader and broader in America, this dissatisfaction of Americans in general about the state of the economy and the state of their affairs has begun to boil to the surface. And now we're seeing, demands for things. We want student loan forgiveness. We got ourselves into this debt, but we want somebody to bail us out of it. We're not happy with things the way they are because we need more money, so we want the government to give us more stuff, right? We want free health care. We want free child care. We want this for free. We want that for free. Then it's all fine, right? But this is what Andrew Tytler said was simply saying that the capitalism will work. See, capitalism functions on the basis that everybody is responsible for themselves. And you go out and you work hard and you take the risk and you grow a business and you succeed. And that capitalism, generates prosperity. But when that capitalism becomes corrupted and you have a structure that benefits the uber wealthy at the expense of the worker, then you begin to run into these problems where people say, well, look, I can't get ahead. I am stuck where I am. And so the rich have all the money, so they should give me some. Well, as soon as you start down that road, that is a road to the end of the cycle. And you take a look at a lot of what, the current younger generation is demanding. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an example, talking about, free everything for the government. But this is also the other problem of the idea, which is that debts and deficits don't matter. It's what the one thing I can't forego is hypocrisy. And the one thing that really bothers me currently about a lot of the mainstream media, especially on the conservative side, is this hypocrisy that during the last administration, debts and deficits mattered. They railed for 8 years about the debt and the deficits. I interviewed numerous congressmen and senators talking about, oh, yeah, we're going to rein in the debt. Boy, you put us in control. We're going to fix this debt and deficit, and we're going to get us back onto a path of fiscal sustainability. We're about to pass a continuing resolution coming up in the next 2 months that will be in excess of almost $4 trillion. And we're talking about pushing a $1.5 trillion deficit in an economic expansion. Now, those things don't add up. And you take a look at the amount of debt that it now requires just to create 2% economic growth, and you understand what the problem is. Right now, we spend nearly $4 for every $1 of economic growth. We spend $4 in debt to generate $1 of economic growth. That's economically unsustainable long term because it can only grow. $4 becomes $5, $5 becomes $6. It takes more and more debt because debt has to be serviced to create a dollar's worth of economic growth. Currently today, the average household, if you just look at household debt, to raise a family of 4 in America, just to get by, you're talking about $52,000, $53,000 a year. And that's not doing a whole lot, right? That's just, getting rent paid and keeping kids in school. That's it. That doesn't include college, right? We're just talking about family of 4, getting by, feeding them, getting to work, doing what you got to do. There's about a $3,200 deficit currently between what the average wage is and what the average household requirement is. So that money's got to come from somewhere. So it's got to come from debt. Well, that's why household debt is now at record high levels. It's taking more and more debt to fund the cost of living. Why? Because wages aren't rising at a pace fast enough to support the cost of living. And yes, we talk about inflation. There is no inflation. The Federal Reserve says, hey, we can't even get to 2%, so we got lower rates because we can't even get to 2% inflation. But yet you ask the average household, they have inflation because their cost of living is rising faster than their wages and salaries. And in fact, it's interesting because one of the side benefits of tax cuts and tax reform was supposed to be strongly rising wages. We give tax cuts to corporations, they're going to trickle down, and they're going to give a big increase in wages to their employees. That didn't happen. We got a little bit of an increase in wages, but that is now beginning to fade because, the economy is slowing down and you're starting to see a reduction in wages. You're also seeing longer work weeks. People are working longer for less money. But this all contributes to the problem of this disparity in the economy, which is why you are starting to get more of this dissatisfaction of Americans wanting some type of government bailout. We need some help. And this is why you're starting to see and have been seeing, even in the last election cycle, even when, don't forget that when Bernie Sanders was running against Hillary Clinton, he didn't do too bad. If you went back and actually looked at how he was doing in the polls before there were some kind of some shady stuff that happened, there was a good chance that Bernie Sanders was going to get the nomination over Hillary Clinton. So but even whether you agree with that or not, it's irrelevant. The fact that he did such a good showing as a overt socialist should be the thing that concerns you. He's running again in this upcoming election. And now that's good for Trump because he'll probably wind up running as independent, pull votes from the Democrats, which will probably guarantee a Trump victory. But the fact that he is gaining popularity and the fact that you have people like Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, Stacey Kelton, others, that are talking about these socialistic tendencies in the economy and in government should be concerning. Because despite the fact that we rename things, right? High yield bond funds, as an example. Sounds good. I want a bond fund that has a high yield. Who wouldn't? I want a high yield money market, right? I want more than what the economy is currently paying out. I want that. So how do you get it? You have to buy high yield bonds. What are high yield bonds? They're junk bonds, right? So from a marketing basis, we rename junk and we call it high yield, so you'll buy it. Well, we can rename socialism into social democracy. See, it sounds a lot better. Nobody likes the word socialism. Nobody likes the word communism. So let's change the name to social democracy. Hey, why not try social democracy, right? Capitalism's not working. Let's try social democracy. It sounds completely sane, right? But just because you change the name of social democracy from socialism doesn't mean it's not socialism. And the ideas and the tenets behind social democracy, I'll get that R in there.
Democratic socialism.
Yes, I will get the R in there. But the ideas behind social democracy are exactly the same as socialism. And the outcomes are ultimately the same. And it doesn't, the one thing that is clear and prevalent, whether you take a look at any socialistic country in the world, right? It doesn't ultimately work. You don't solve the wealth gap. The people at the top, socialism is like a pyramid scheme. If you're the first in and you're at the top of the pyramid, socialism is really good for you. If you're at the bottom end of the pyramid, it's not so good for you, right? Because you're paying for everybody else. But this is the idea. So anyway, we've got an article out about this today that kind of goes through this whole explanation. It's on the website now at realinvestmentadvice.com. Again, when we take a look at where we are in this current cycle, it should be a bit disturbing. And as we get ready to go to polls to vote coming up in 2020, this should be a topic that we are demanding from our representatives. This should be a point that we demand from those that we elect into office, that we have to reverse the course of debts and deficits, because the path that we are on is not one that has ever worked out well in the history of the world. Have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow. More of the Lance Roberts Show right here. Get by the website, realinvestmentadvice.com. We've got lots of new stuff out. Blog posts, newsletter, 3 minutes on your money. It's all there at the website, realinvestmentadvice.com. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow morning right here on the next edition of the Lance Roberts Show podcast. Chris Salcedo coming up next.
You can get daily real investment news you can use, delivered at the speed of the internet. Sign up for Lance's newsletter now at realinvestmentadvice.com.